So before we just start the discussion, I'd like to declare that I'm a co-founder of Games That Move You, public benefit corporation that was spun out of the university to commercialize our motor rehab game. So to summarize the literature so far, we know that exercise is really important, pretty much to every aspect of health and function. But it's possibly even more important for people with disabilities than it is for the general public. Some of the biggest reasons, the things I've observed as a clinician and looking at the literature are mood elevating properties. People with disabilities have much higher rates of depression than those without, possibly because of more limited community participation and also aspects of neurological diseases that they may have. And exercise is known to have very strong benefits on mood, probably equivalent to about an SSRI. These are also a population of people with high rates of fatigue, and exercise is also known in the literature to benefit fatigue. And there's also some emerging literature that it may benefit cognitive and neural recovery, not restoration of function, but better functioning in the moment, memory consolidation. So if it's so important for people with disabilities, why don't they exercise? So I'll present a case study just to illustrate some of these challenges. Mrs. X has stroke, affecting movement on her dominant side. She has very little movement in her arm and walks short distances with a cane. Balance is difficult. She's unable to drive, and she's unable to work, and is on a fixed disability income. She struggles with depression and fatigue. Her family members work and have limited ability to drive her places, except to the multiple appointments she has to go to. Everyone is exhausted between rehab, caregiving, and juggling with therapy visits. And finances are tight because of increased cost of care and the decreased income coming in. So in order for her to get exercise, she must first summon the motivation to plan ahead when she's already overwhelmed. She must find a facility that is accessible for her. Then she must apply for financial assistance programs at the facility and hope that she's approved. Then she must convince a friend to give her a ride and schedule every session in advance. Then she must push through the fatigue, the extra time of getting ready. Then she's got to figure out how to get on and off the exercise equipment safely and adjust the weights with one arm, which means reaching across her body in danger of falling off of the chair or asking for assistance. And finally, she's got to worry about how others perceive her or the time it takes her to use the machines. Additional barriers to exercise have been identified in the literature. So it's known that people with disabilities generally want to exercise, and those who are not employed actually have more time to engage in exercise than the general public. But there's many common barriers. Cost is a huge one. Access to accessible exercise facilities. Transportation, many folks can't drive. They don't know how to exercise and how to use the equipment within their physical limitations. And lack of energy and motivation is a big barrier too. So these are the citations to that work. Some of these barriers have been solved by the talks we've just seen in this panel. So adapted controllers certainly increase access and have the potential to increase access in the home if the cost can be reduced, and may help with lack of energy barrier by increasing motivation. No transportation would be required. The biking in a virtual environment with accessible equipment certainly eliminates the barrier of not knowing how to use the equipment, because the equipment is specifically designed for people with disabilities as well as healthy users, and it may promote increased exercise through engagement. And all projects offer the additional benefit of increased social participation. So that's a theme that seems to be really important to this work. So the commonalities amongst the projects discussed so far is that they all utilize input from the stakeholders to create something that's really relevant for the user. They've all used this agile or iterative project development process, which is also what we use in my lab, to create a truly user-centered project. They really strongly emphasize engagement, and perhaps most importantly, they enable participation in persuasive exercise technologies. So they increase access to things that people with disabilities often are excluded from. So for example, virtual environments can enable them to experience bike trails that they can otherwise access. They can experience consumer games and play with their friends. And they have access to the social aspects of exercise that really matter to consumers. So in some, they address what matters to the community, fun, inclusion, also exercise. But there's still some remaining barriers and work to be done. So probably the largest barrier that remains to be addressed is the cost and disseminability aspect. So we've heard initial plans of how that's going to move forward, but we're not quite there yet. So custom hardware increases cost. So currently it's inaccessible to most of the home users where the technology stands now, unless you can get insurance to reimburse it and help with that cost barrier. So insurance reimbursement is going to require some additional years of work and some cost effectiveness analyses to really sell them on the idea that increasing exercise would actually lead to healthcare savings. Another potential solution that my lab has tried out, so we've talked here about the hardware solution, is a software solution, and there's both pros and cons to this. So what we did is created a custom game using the Microsoft Kinect input. So we've designed software using off-the-shelf hardware that anybody can go out and purchase for their in-home use. So the biggest advantage is probably a low cost, so you could deliver it for something like a $99 a year license. And it's very customizable to different ability levels because you can map any movement to any game mechanics when you design the game yourself. So you can make the same game accessible to wheelchair users, people with MS, people with spinal cord injury, various levels of motor function after a stroke. But the largest downside to this is that you're limited to basically one game because game design is so expensive. So there is less opportunity for inclusion and social participation, and that's the trade-off. This just shows you a quick example of what the game that my lab has designed using the Unity game engine. So this is it would be played by a participant with stroke with their weaker side to both provide exercise and train the function of the weaker arm. So we know that rehab does not end after discharge, it needs to be continued. And it solves the access barrier because this can be done in home. So that's just a quick glimpse of the game. There's more to it, but we don't have time. I'd like to quickly talk about some of the pilot work, phase 2 work that we've done in MS, which shows that once the technology is developed, it's feasible that people will actually use it in their home and benefit from it. So our participants were 10 people with progressive MS. It was a waitlist control design study. All but 2 were wheelchair users, and many were power chair users. And the majority of our sample was essentially homebound and found it very difficult to access their community. So the intervention that we prescribed was 1.5 hours of gameplay per day, so it's a lot. We wanted to see how much people would actually do, times 21 consecutive days. They also got 5 hours of therapist consultation over 4 sessions. In addition to this, we wanted to help them carry over the rehab games they made through the game to daily activities, and we used a biofeedback smartwatch app that told them how many arm movements they were making, and it vibrated to alert them when they weren't moving the weaker side of their body. So that helped carry over. Participation in home rehab was really good in our study, so we were actually surprised at how compliant people were and engaged with it. So we prescribed 30 hours, and on average they did over 22 hours in 3 weeks. And this is a population of people where fatigue is a huge issue, and they're completely unsupervised. So they were doing this entirely on their own. So that's 75% of the very high target that we gave them. And they were very satisfied with the intervention. Surprisingly, we found that in a population where fatigue is a huge problem, we actually found a 25% reduction in fatigue just by engaging in some exercise with the weaker arm. So this is probably equivalent to an energy expenditure of about walking. So despite adding over an hour of exercise to their daily routine, adding extra stuff, we actually improved fatigue by 25%. 45% improvement was found in the use of the weaker arm for daily activities, which has been strongly linked with quality of life improvements. And a 15% improvement was reported in both perceived physical and mental health. And this was only a 3-week period. One participant, so we didn't measure this as an objective outcome, but one participant reported that she lost 7 pounds during the 3-week study because she went from completely sedentary to engaging in a gameplay 1.5 hours a day. We didn't see any changes in the control group. Patient satisfaction was very high. They enjoyed it. They felt really empowered in their own care. They really liked the aspect of feedback that's also present in these technologies and not available with traditional exercise. They felt that that was really important and motivating for them. So to summarize the field, persuasive exercise technologies can motivate behavior change, and we do have some early evidence of that. We're currently doing a multi-site RCT to further that along. Software applications allow for very flexible customization to the users, and they do address the cost, transportation, and access barriers in the immediate time frame. But they can't offer some of the other benefits of the technologies discussed on the panel, like inclusion and a variety to pick their own games. In contrast, hardware solutions allow for increased inclusion and access, but cost may be, at least in the immediate future, a barrier to disseminability. So future work should aim to kind of balance both of these and take the good aspects of both. Wearable sensors are coming along at a pretty fast rate. So my guess is that the public is going to start to adopt these wearable sensors and use them, and games will be designed for the general public, which then can be easily adapted for people with disabilities, and they can play with their friends. So that may be a nice marriage for ease of access and more rapid commercialization. Social inclusion is a huge thing that we have to keep considering as we move forward, because it is something that's identified as really important for people with disabilities, especially those with very limited community engagement opportunities. And then the other thing that we really can make good use of as this field moves along is that technology offers the potential for feedback and monitoring that we don't get through these other exercise trials where they come into a gym and do their 12-week program. So this is going to provide us with big data that can then be mined for rehab and exercise research to really understand what are the key pieces of an exercise program for different populations. And it also serves as a motivator for users. Thank you.